Right, but now we're going back into the moral argument here. We're
Sure.
saying like, what if the Nazi tribe says, "Well, we're going to kill you because we're going to create the super race, right? And we're going to do that. That's what we think is a good thing. Why are they wrong if they try and kill another tribe?"
Well, on a macro scale, so on a micro scale, it may not have, but on this macro scale, it's interesting that the Nazis were defeated because the whole world came together and said, you know what? That's not the way that all of us can flourish. So when you step back on this altruism, the bigger the scope of what you consider to be in your tribe, that's where we start to see these moral plays come out and work together. And again, I just don't see why a god is necessary for that. That was in the benefit of the whole planet that the bad apples be stopped. And we call them a bad apple not because there's intrinsic evil in the world, but because we did not like the actions that were being performed. It was subjective. Some people
Okay,
liked
so
it.
then, so you're saying that morality ultimately is subjective then?
Well, morality, I think that bears it out. I think every single individual you talk to will think that certain things are moral and certain things aren't. You don't have a universal consensus on these things. But the thing is, we are biologically wired to tend to appreciate altruism and tend to appreciate, the tribe. So because those are, again, we're kind of going in circles a bit on that, Justin, but I feel like that's an adequate grounding.
Okay, so then essentially we're back to the epistemological question then, how do we know morality? And you're saying it's hardwired into our system. Well, that would also mean then that every thought we have is hardwired into our system. So why should we believe anything's true?
Well, and yeah, and you think you probably would know that I would just affirm that and say, absolutely, I'm a determinist. So I do believe that what's in our heads is determined by what the environment around us and the chemicals firing in our brains. I absolutely think that.
So then we would have no grounds to, even in an evolutionary way, to condemn Hitler or Putin or anybody doing evil.
Well, so I would have grounds to condemn them because of what I value. But yes, in this grand sense, no, like there's nothing outside. I don't see why we need something outside of us than to say, you know what, I prefer not to be murdered. And so I can imagine that other people also don't like to be murdered. So I'm going to label that wrong. I tend to think that wrong is what we label the outcomes we don't like, and good is what we label the outcomes that we do like. And if you look at it that way, the fact that we lazily say good and bad for our own preferences doesn't mean that they aren't our own preferences.
Right, but let me just try and follow this through. And I'm excited that we can talk about this because rarely do I get to talk about this in an in-depth way with people who have an opposite worldview, unfortunately. And that is, if you're going to say that every thought you have is the result of, say, the laws of physics, it's determined, then your very preferences are determined as well.
Correct.
Including the preference that you like love and the preference that, say, maybe Hitler likes murder.
Hitler also liked love. He just did it. His flavor of what he called love was different. But yeah, I mean, it's sorry, I lost my train of thought for a second. Just absolutely, our individual preferences. Sorry, what was the question again?
So I guess it's if everything is determined, I think Frank's problem with that is that then you can't say that Hitler was right or wrong. He was just following his kind of chemical nature. You are following your chemical nature. There is no right or wrong to really talk about in that.
And I would say if we value human life and if we value altruism, if we set that goal, just like you said, if we come up with rules to the soccer game that we agree to, if we agree that the things human flourishing and reducing suffering are good, then we can say certain things are good or bad. But you can't say something is good or bad without knowing what you're comparing it to. And even if God exists, and even if God is the perfect moral being, the fact that Frank is comparing his decision making to what God would say versus someone like me who is not taking God into consideration at all proves that it is, that on an individual basis, it completely is subjective. Even if God exists and he is the absolute best thing to choose, we are all subjectively choosing something.
Well, our decisions are always in us, the subject, but do they have an external referent that's an object? That's the question. Like, for example, I may say 2 plus 2 equals 3, and you say 2 plus 2 equals 4. They're both subjective decisions, but you're actually right and I'm wrong because there's an object outside of ourselves, a mathematical grid that I think is grounded in the mind of God. I guess what I'm trying to get at is if our moral preferences come from evolution, then so do our thoughts come from evolution, including the thought that atheism is true. And so there's no way for you and I to have a real debate as to whether or not Christianity or atheism is true, because if we're both governed by the laws of physics, we're not even uttering truth claims. We're just uttering what the laws of physics are telling us.
But truth, if you define truth as I do, as how well something conforms to reality, as adjudicated by predictive power, then we can see if our statements make predictions, and if they make predictions, those can be tested, and those can be tested whether or not our brains are rational or whether they're reliable, all those kind of things. Because,
but they,
I was going to say, if I predict that there's a door behind me, if that's the truth claim that I want to make, if I go and walk over and I can't leave the room, well then that truth claim is not there. The fact that our brains are basically good enough is not a good reason to rely on them. That's why we don't like to rely on our brains. And that's why science and philosophy, like laws of logic, you come up with all these rules to accommodate the fact that our brains didn't evolve to become truth machines. They evolved to be survival machines. And that's why we actually need these other parameters around us. But they are good enough for us to, if we are acting rational, to make predictive tests. And that's really all we need.
But in order to evaluate whether something is predictive and accurate, we need a mind that can follow the evidence where it leads, not just follow the laws of physics. So it seems to me that any effort to prove materialism would require materialism to be false, so you can actually follow the evidence where it leads. See, any experiment you run to prove materialism is going to require you to have the free will and the capability to follow the evidence where it leads. If you don't have that free will or capability, if materialism is true, you can't discover it's true.
If I could put it in a nutshell, if determinism is true, you didn't choose to be an atheist and Frank didn't choose to be a Christian. The laws of physics handed that down to you. There's just no other way around it. You didn't follow a line of evidence and reason your way into atheism. You were going to be an atheist and Frank was going to be a Christian because of brain chemistry and physics, basically.
And what may surprise you is that is what when I left my faith, that is what I had to come to terms with. And I have come to terms with it, that I don't actually deny that. I feel like the other ontologies that I used to layer on top of it was an illusion for both because of indoctrination, but also various things that I don't disagree that if I'm determined, if determinism is true, then I was determined to be an atheist. I don't even fight that one.
And what's your problem with that, Frank, in the sense, Paul's just saying, yeah, fair play. That's it.
Well, my problem is then we're locked in agnosticism. In fact, I can't say anything better than C.S. Lewis. Let me just say what C.S. Lewis said about this. He said, suppose there were no intelligence behind the universe. In that case, nobody designed my brain for the purpose of thinking. Thought is merely the byproduct of some atoms within my skull. But if so, how can I trust my own thinking to be true? But if I can't trust my own thinking, of course, I can't trust the arguments leading to atheism and therefore have no reason to be an atheist or anything else. Unless I believe in God, I can't believe in thought, so I can never use thought to disbelieve in God.
Yeah, so I don't think, I nod my head to all of that, except that the way that C.S. Lewis could have made determinations is to make predictions and test them and see if they work. And again, I know you need your own senses, so you do have to have some presuppositions. We have to presume that our senses are reliable enough. We have to presume that the universe can be learned about. That is something else I had to come to. I wish more non-Christians would agree that there are some presuppositions that we carry and that we just basically have to. There's some brute facts.
Let's leave that there for the moment, because to be honest, this is the stuff of sci-fi. I've just been watching, funnily enough, a whole sci-fi series recently on the question of whether the universe is determined and all the kind of weird anomalies and thought experiments that throws up. But I do want to return to the central claim of Frank's book, which is that Jesus is the ultimate sort of archetype of all these other heroes, and they're all pointing to him, whether it's ancient mythologies, or whether it's modern superhero films and Star Wars. It's actually Jesus is the true myth, as C.S. Lewis himself put it. let's start with you on this one, Paul. Well, no, let's start with Frank actually, just to spell out, because you do in the final chapter, Frank, talk about this